this is week 4 of Cultivating a Peaceful Home. The first week, we talked about God's Word as the foundation of everything that we do. And we talked about making a plan and being intentional in raising our children with aim to love the Lord and to honor Him and to have a home that's peaceful, and what can we do to be in that direction. Week 2, we talked about how our words are important and how they can build up and they can tear down. And I think we saw that every one of us has issues with that. Is that correct? I think that's 100%. We all have things that we struggle with, and we can hurt people with our words and our actions. And then week 3, we talked about, which was last week, about the importance of a peaceful home being a home that is safe for all family members. Of course, we're talking about physically that they're safe, but also with the trust level that they have with us, and how we treat them and how we allow siblings to treat each other. Are they safe? Are their hearts safe in our homes? So we talked about that and a lot more. And today we're going to get into some really neat terms that we've just used in our home growing up that some of you might find familiar, that because you've been here before and heard these, but it's words like, phrases like stop the world, or I don't want to be in this mess, and Ellis Boot Camp, and apologizing and training ahead and things like that. So we're going to get specific things to help in cultivating a peaceful home. Okay? So tonight is a lot about obedience, about discipline. Does anybody need that in your home? Okay, so let's get started. Obedience. What is the reason for discipline? Well, the reason is to really, we're wanting to teach our children to obey their parents, right? Who ultimately do we need to obey the rest of our lives? God. They are being, I believe that would be a dog in the background. Did you hear that? Oh, but we do. Times 4. So, right? But Ephesians 6:1 and Colossians 3:20 say, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right and well-pleasing to the Lord. Proverbs 13:24, he who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. So obedience is all about learning to trust God, learning to obey without hesitation, to respond to what God says, which means under our training, they're learning to respond to us. But it's also the key to restoration taking place in our homes daily and many times throughout the day, right? Okay, and Hebrews 12:11, no discipline seems pleasant at that time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Isn't that a great verse? So do you all ever feel like that? Like you just don't feel like dealing with disobedient children and you let it slide? Well, it's more work when we keep letting it slide. And we'll talk about that tonight because certainly I have lots of examples of me doing that. And so we want to be able to have some things set in place in our home that we've already made be the criteria, the things that are important to us about obedience. I wanted to tell you this. Sometimes we discipline our children because we think someone is watching. Have you ever done that? Sometimes that's good motivation for us because we need to get up and deal with them anyway, right? But sometimes our motivation is wrong. Our motivation is what people think about us. And I realized this a long time ago in myself when I was at my friend's house, and our oldest son, who is now 29, our oldest son was playing at the Carr's house across the street from us. And I knew obedience is all the way, right away, and with a cheerful heart. Delayed disobedience is disobedience. I knew those things, and so did my friend, and so I wanted to look like a good mom. So I told him it was time to go, and he didn't come. And so I went over there and talked to him and whatever, but my heart was to make my friend look like I wanted my friend to think I was a good mom. You understand? And so we want to keep that kind of thing in check, because I feel like that applies any stage of parenting you're at. And even if you don't have children, it still applies to us. When we worry, when we do things for the wrong motive, we do things to look good instead of being more concerned about our heart and our child's heart. So just throwing that out there. We don't want to raise our kids with the motive to appear a certain way, because then that becomes their goal instead of being concerned about the heart. So obey all the way, right away, and with a cheerful heart. This means when we tell our child to clean up the toys, or we tell our child something to do, that they need to do it. And right now you can stop and think, does your child obey? Maybe sometimes, or maybe you're thinking, hardly ever. Well, then that becomes a priority of what you're going to do this week in your home. Because you must have obedience to have a peaceful home, right? And obedience is this important. We'll need to obey the rest of our lives. Now, so that means you don't want to count. Don't raise your hands if you do it, but you tell your child, clean up those toys, and you go, 1, 2, 3. If you're doing that, you're admitting you're not listening, and I'm not expecting it right away. So what you want to do to change that is you admit it to yourself. Go ahead and talk to your kids about it and say, this is what I've been doing when I call you, and that needs to stop, because I'm teaching y'all to obey later. I'm teaching you to obey on 3 instead of at my word. All right, now make sure the way we ask our kids to obey is talking voice, and not degrading, not demanding, not harsh, not mean. We should be able to communicate like this level in our home about most things. All right, so there, take a look at yourself and how you communicate with the family members that you have, and see if you need to adjust that any. But if you're doing the counting thing, gather them together the next time you're doing devotions or having a meal together. Just bring it up, because within our homes we want to have dialogue with each other where we admit things that we're doing wrong that need to be altered. As you watch them grow up, they will be able to have that safe spot with you, share those things with you. If you're acknowledging to them you've done things wrong and you're going to do things differently. So you gather them together and you say, I have allowed you guys to obey at the count of 3, not realizing I'm teaching you to delay the obedience. So we're going to practice. If your kids are little, role play with them. Okay, and you say, okay, let's pretend that you got your toys out over here, or they probably already are, right? So no need to pretend, just go where they are and say, okay, when I say to clean it up, I want you to go ahead and clean it up right then, but I want you to acknowledge you heard my voice. So I want you to say yes, ma'am, or yes, whatever it is in your home that you want to be said. So you role play with them, and they say, go clean up your toys. Yes, ma'am. Yes, mom, whatever it is, and then they go. And you tell them, I'm not doing the 1, 2, 3 thing. Now, that means, what do you need to stop doing? So when you catch yourself, just laugh about it. Say, well, I was doing it again. Clean up your toys. Teach yourself to stop, and then teach them to obey right away. And you need to have a plan in place. Think through it. For those of you married, talk to your spouse about it. What do we want our plan to be about it? They don't need to get spanked every time about things like that. The Bible does say spanking is good for children. Now, not everything needs it, though. In the training years, you're teaching them to be obedient, right? So if they continue to disobey, then you know what you need to do. And go over them. If you disobey, this is the consequence. And be consistent. Make it fit the crime. Okay? For example, if you have a teenager who's on a cell phone and you see that their messages to someone have been unkind, Is your child responsible with that technology? Are they? So the punishment, the discipline for it would be removing this until that child understands the importance of kindness and the importance of how their words hurt and bullying and this and that. Right? Now, do we need to flip out and say, not to be confused with the flip phone? Okay. Some of you don't know what that is. So you want to think through, if I'm training to the heart of my child, the punishment is not just, you can't have a phone then. What are you teaching them? You want to teach them the heart, which is kindness. So until you can treat people with respect and be trustworthy of this device, which is very powerful, then you're not ready. It might not be taking it away so much as you are not to delete any messages, you to show it to me every day so I can help you to know what unkindness is and gossip is and stirring up. And we park it in the kitchen at this time at night. All phones go here. Like, you decide in your home what that looks like and stick to it. You don't count, don't threaten. Make the punishment is not fun, this punishment. Make the punishment fit the crime, so to speak. Sometimes, perhaps what we are expecting in our children needs to change. What I mean by that is we may have a situation going on in our homes where our child is exhausting to us because of their disobedience. And we may then, after studying them, discover something that is difficult for them. For example, maybe you've said, clean your room. Clean your room, clean your room, clean your room. And you're so upset that they don't clean their room. But after observing that child and understanding their makeup more, you may realize that child, that task is too overwhelming for that child. So you may need to say, how about if I go up there and help you get started? And you help them with one task. Do any of you feel like that? Like your house can get to a point where you're like, I'm paralyzed. I don't know how to, I wish somebody just come and help me get started. Well, you might have a child that's like that. What I discovered with us is we have a child, maybe more than this, but we have at least one that I discovered when I would tell him, 50% chance. When I would tell him I want you to pick up your shoes, I want you to put your backpack away and put those books over there. Well, nothing got done. And I discovered 3 commands were too much for him. So instead of me getting upset with him, I needed to learn him, to study him and understand how his brain works, and then work with him within the skill set he has. And say, okay, right now, like it could be write these 3 things down, okay? Or it could be do 2 things, and then come back to me and I'll tell you the next 2 things to do. Does that make sense? So study your children. That's one of the greatest things a mom and a dad can do for those family members is to take the time to observe the beautiful way they've been created, the talents, the skill set, so that we can shape them. We can get them opportunities to broaden those skills that they have. Like if you see your child draw something beautiful, and you're like, I had no idea that you could do that. Then, pray about it. Lord, is this something that I should give more experience to my child with? Is this something you want to develop in her? Art lessons. You could somebody might teach art and you have sewing skills or cooking skills, and you could share these, back and forth with your kids in that way. Or you could pay for art lessons. But you at least notice that talent that child has. It could be an athletic skill. It could be that you're watching them, and when you have people over, they gravitate towards the elderly in the room. And you notice they are so good with older people. They're not intimidated. They're just gentle and loving. And then part of your prayer and your plan for your individual family, not anyone else's, but your little nation, is to maybe go visit nursing homes or have an older person from your church that you could go visit once a week, once a month. Every once in a while, you could bake cookies for that person, take a note. Your child could go read books. Do you see? Your family's plan depends on the members in it. That's why we don't want to compare to anybody else's. But study that. But not just only knowing their strengths and their skills. You also want to know the weaknesses that child has, the fears they have. Are they scared to do simple things like go ask the Chick-fil-A counter if they could have an extra Chick-fil-A sauce? Is that something that's fearful for your teenage daughter even? Well, if you notice that, how many of you were like that? Like you were intimidated to ask for stuff or make a phone call to schedule an appointment? Yeah, or ask for a babysitter because you might feel rejected. These are things that you might notice in your children, different little fears, or a fear of being in a group of people. So study that and then make a little plan to help your child get past that, gently coaching them and helping them see life through a different vision. We've had our kids, when they have they don't understand or disagree with something their teacher has done, I don't go talk to the teacher, at least not initially. I want my children to have the confidence to go talk about the matter. And so they are trained ahead, they are coached ahead of time and taught to see through a different perspective. Like, you're going to talk to your teacher, but your teacher, here's a different perspective. You're like, Laura's at UF right now. Okay. So I have a child at University of Florida. And so if she doesn't understand an assignment, she's talking to me on the phone and saying, I totally didn't do this assignment or don't know what to do. Well, even at my age, but her age, I don't just immediately correct her or give her, I listen, try to listen fully to the matter, and then coach her on how to handle that situation. And I try to always help them see through different eyes. And I said, you know what, your professor, that would be really great for your professor to know, because if you are misunderstanding the assignment, there's a chance other people are too. So go and ask the professor for more blah, blah, blah. Well, let me give you another example. My son and my husband are remodeling their engineering firm. And so my daughter is in the architecture department at UF. So they asked my daughter, get it? Like they asked her sister, okay, to come up with plans for the building. Well, doesn't that sound overwhelming for her to ask a professor to help her? Doesn't it? So I said, Laura, let's look at it from a different perspective. Your professors love architecture. For them to have a student come to them and say, I'm working on this design for my dad and my brother for their building. I was wondering if you could give me some ideas. Like, instead of seeing through a scared eyes or a student's eyes, help them see bigger through the professor's eyes, which is, you are going to stand out as a student who is very interested in this field and actually has a project already at hand. And they would love to give you their input, most likely. Do you see? So that's part of our role, is helping our kids to think through the eyes and the ears of another person. And that includes sticky situations that they might have, difficulties with teachers or difficulty with peers or whatever. Help them to guide them in that way of seeing it. There's sin natures. And remember, we all have them. We have different things that go on in our hearts and in our homes. And we want our devotions to, like if you're doing Proverbs every day, it's a great time to be able to bring these things into discussions so that you are helping them to learn to address their heart and the sin natures that they have. Okay, role playing and explaining the situation before an event or situation happens. I call it training ahead. And I feel like this is one of the most significant things that I've done as a parent. And I just told you an example of how I coached my college daughter training ahead before she talks to professor, an angle to approach it with. But it starts very young. It starts wherever you are with your kids, okay? Just start talking with them. What you want to think about is you are, in having a peaceful home, it is raising kids whose hearts are just calm. They might be fun and vivacious children and outgoing. That's also calm, okay? That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about they are calm in their heart. And part of that is us making sure we're always preparing them for situations that are coming up. So think about things you have this week that are coming up. Maybe they're trying out for the basketball team. So you're going to coach ahead in things, in areas that you feel like could be weaknesses for your children. Like they compare themselves with others, or they tend to complain, or they are ones that say, I'm never going to make it. I never make it. Nobody ever likes me. They do that. Well, that's not a great quality to have in life, is it? That actually is going to keep them from having friends if they're always that, right? So it's okay. God's given us all children with all types of problems. That's just one that you're dealing with. We all have them, right? And so you want your training to be geared towards your individual situation. So with that child that feels that way, you say, now, before we go, I want you to know this is a lot of people's first time playing. Some are going to be better. Some might not. Some might be not as good as you. And it doesn't matter. If you fall on the court, like just depending on their ages, you understand, of how you would coach them. But if you fall, just get up. Everybody's going to fall sometime. So you help them understand how to approach this new situation they're going to be in. If you're going to grandma's house, you have these different children with different tendencies. Don't you want your grandparents to feel respected and honored, right? Maybe you have a child that when you go to see grandma, they just walk past her. Well, that's disrespectful. So it's time to make a change, right? So you train ahead. On the way there, during your devotions, you bring it up and you don't single them out and make them embarrassed or anything like that. But you say, you know what? We're going to go to grandma's house this week. What are ways we can honor them? What about if we sit and ask them some stories of their life? And what are some questions we can come up with? And you ask, what are things you'd like to know about grandma? You might have to help them. Maybe they don't want to know anything. But you can help them. You say, you know what? They were in this war. Why don't you ask them about that war? And when we're at the table, you stay at the table. You don't get up early and leave because you're bored. Each one of you is going to ask one question or something like that. That's one way to do it. Or when we go into her house, you're all going to hug her. Now, I'm going to show you this one thing that I've heard many things, feedback about this, that it's changed the way that they approach this particular situation. Okay, so I hope it's helpful to you too. So if you have a little child, really any age, but let's even go to be very young, that they hide behind your leg when they're meeting someone, and we have the tendency to say what? They're so shy, right? Don't judge anybody for doing that after I tell you this, okay? Don't. This is not about judging anybody else. It's about what can we do as parents to equip our children to love others and to be respectful for others. And that's how you approach a lot of this when you're training to the heart. So let's say you have a little child that does that. I want you to think in your mind, really what's happening is you're allowing your child to be disrespectful and to be rude. You're allowing them to be self-centered. Have you ever thought of it like that? You are allowing them to be all about themselves. Now, we don't want to go extreme here because that's not your heart and it's not their heart. But now that you know a different approach and different thought through that, it's easy to change. It may take several times, But when you're consistent, it will change. So what you can do to your child is say, you know how you hide behind my legs sometimes? Say it's really sweet and on their level. You know how you hide behind my legs? I didn't realize that that was rude. Because instead of hugging grandma or hugging this person that you're going to go meet, instead of hugging them, you haven't shown them any attention. And so this time what I want you to do is not hide behind my leg and not pull on my skirt and not do all that. This time I want you to hug them. Now, if you forget, I'm just going to quietly take you to the bathroom and I'm going to remind you of it. And then we're going to come back out and you hug. Now, I'm going to tell you what not to do. After you've told them this, do not go, oh, and then make a big deal, because then who has it become about? Me and how I look as a parent. And that is not the goal. The goal is quiet training so your children learn to be respectful to other people. So when your child does that, you might say, I'll tap you on the back if you do that, just to remind you. But if you forget, I'm going to quietly take you in the room. Nobody needs to know you're doing this, because you can still be respectful. Hey, how are you? And then they come back out and hug, okay? Do y'all understand that? Again, no one's motive is to be rude for it. I just want you to see it in a different light, that it can appear rude. And we're letting our children, we're not teaching them the confidence and the people skills to be about other people. And that's really a goal, don't you think? So a little bit of work, training ahead, and them understanding a perspective beyond their own is very helpful in raising children to be about others, to love others well. All right, what about obedience? What are some things we can do to teach them obedience? Young is, you heard me mention it a little bit ago. When they're young, role play with them and teach them to, when you call their name, to respond. Now, I wish I would have learned that a long time ago, like when I was little. Because maybe you have some, when you say, can you wash the dishes? They go, and they do the dishes. But obedience is all the way, right away, and with a cheerful heart. They obeyed right away. Did they do it with a happy heart? And so that's what we want to work towards. You can't make somebody be happy, but you can make them respond well and recognize what you just did was, but again, train ahead. When we call your name to do something, I want you to acknowledge I said it. Okay, Mom, I'll be right there. Or, Mom, may I finish this game? It's 3 more minutes. May I finish that? And you can say yes, or you might have reason to say, not this time, no. If you're going to do that, that should have been part of your training that you have, is if I say no, you need to come right away. But sometimes out of respect for what they're doing, it might be, sure, that's fine. You can come, you can do it right when you finish. All right? So, but that's your goal, right away, all the way, and with a cheerful heart. Now, what do I mean by all the way? That means if you said, like, for you to wash the dishes, and they leave something because it's their brother's dirty cup, did they obey all the way? So, as inconvenient as it may be to get them out of bed, on occasion I've done this to make a point. When I've seen it go on, with that, if they're doing it because it's their brothers, they're going to have to come do it right away. If they forgot or something, I'm not going to wake them up for it. But if it's a habit where they just didn't do some of the harder dishes, they pretend it needs to soak overnight, like I do. Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay. Then if it's direct disobedience, where they're being self-centered, they didn't want to finish the job, and you can do it very calmly. When you get up and go obey all the way with it. Do it calm. You don't need to yell when you are when you've established the way you communicate with each other. That needs to include us, okay? Any of you relate to that? But I really believe when they respond, yes, ma'am, I think it helps with stubbornness. And I know I struggled still with that. And maybe some of you have children that do too. And that just immediately responding breaks that stubbornness. At least it helps towards the tense shoulders. You want to do your training at home before you go out, right? I don't mean like, oh, we're going to go, let's train real quick. That's not what I mean. It's part of what you are doing throughout the week, preparing that your child can sit still for a little bit of time anyway, when you're at church or when you're at small group or when you're at someone's house, when you're at the grocery store, when you're at a restaurant. There are lots of places that they need to learn to sit still and know to be quiet. So you can put a blanket on the floor and have a little bit of toys, but the blanket is the perimeter to teach them to be still, right? And you can work that time, increase it. But the goal, since we're training to the heart, the goal is that they're respectful of those around them. If they're up and down and get up from church and go to the bathroom and at a restaurant throw food and leave a mess all over the table and the floor, is that respectful to the wait staff, to the church members, to the pastor, to those that are enjoying a nice meal at a restaurant? No. And so that's how we want to go about it, is that they see life beyond their own selfish natures, as we all tend to do, right? So train at home. You can do this when they're in the high chair, and you address what their issues are. If they grunt when they want food, they don't need to do that. I taught ours some very basic sign languages. I think we learned like 4 things or something, like baby sign language. Is this more? And no more. Finished. And what? I think maybe that's it. That was enough. What else is there? Basic stuff. Hungry? Yeah, I do remember that one. What? Please. Okay. Please and hungry, same thing, right? Do y'all remember anything else? Thank you. Okay. Just a few basic ones, and then they're learning to communicate differently without screaming, grunting, and all of that. And you just spend time teaching them. And they shouldn't be allowed to make a mess in a restaurant, ladies. It just shouldn't be. It doesn't need to be. If that's something that you're like, oh no, that's me, then before you go out next, take the time at home to address it and say, we're not going to do this anymore. And if they spill stuff, that's different than if they're like, or take their sippy cup and go, and they look right at you. Like, I dare ya. That's direct defiance right there, and that's worthy of spanking and dealing with things directly. Don't let those children rule the roost. Do I hear an amen? Amen. All right. All right. Now, before you go to events, this is about training ahead again. Predict the behavior based on the past and based on what you know of each of your children, of what could happen. I don't mean for this to be exhausting to you. I got to think ahead of every child and what's going to be. You, with a little bit of thought, can probably predict, when we go to church, this is an issue that we have. Or when we go to play group with this friend, this usually happens between this child and my child. You can predict. So teach your child how to handle themselves. If there's a conflict between your child and another one when your families get together, do not blame the other child. Teach your child, this could happen. Here's how you deal with it. Here's how you are to deal with it. You're to be kind back. Nobody else needs to know it happened. You be kind back, except you can quietly come tell me if it's something that is dangerous. Like a pencil, like we don't need that, Oh, you should have told me earlier you lost your eyeball. Like, we don't need that. I'm not talking about that. But the training ahead just is for everything. You're teaching your children how to expect what's coming up and how to know how to appropriately respond and handle those situations. All right? That even is when somebody's coming to your house You teach them how to converse at the table with them. As they get older, how to ask questions with the guests that are engaging and not be ready for the second question, but how to give and take in communicating with them. We have this wonderful opportunity to teach them people skills, okay? And a lot of that happens at the dining room table. Just throwing that out there because it's hard to do, isn't it? But you can see a lot about how your children know how to communicate with others at the table. So monitor what's going on at your table. Kind of keep an eye on, does everybody talk? One person should talk at a time. Do they have good manners? Do they ask questions? And train them ahead. Hey, you know what? Tonight, when we eat together, I want y'all to ask Dad, what are some things about Dad's work you'd like to know? And teach your kids to engage. Now, when your brother asks that, let Dad answer. Don't interrupt. And you're teaching them how to be considerate of other people at the table. All right, let's talk about stop the world. You've heard me use this maybe in each session so far. When you've identified things that you are working on in your kids, take them very seriously and be willing to adjust your schedule and be inconvenienced to deal with something. If you have one that's mean to another child or disrespectful to you, that needs to be priority, that you stop what you're doing at the time to deal with that when it happens. Stop the world means stop what you're doing and find it important enough to shape that heart of your child. So, I'll give you some examples of my life. This happens. These kind of things happen all the time, but I'm going to throw you out here a couple things for you. We were on the way. Picture 6 little children, 2 of them in car seats. And one of them, they were screaming and it was like just back and forth. I'm like so tired. It was a Wednesday night going to church. And they were just bickering. I was tired and obviously they were exhausted. Have you ever seen that in your kids? But press on, I did. And we kept going. And when I got to church, one of them had taken, sorry, there's a little fly or something. One of them had taken a red marker and a blue marker. And I was so exhausted, I was like, I think it looks okay. The color coordination kind of works with them. But I ended up turning the car around and just going home because more important than anything else, they were exhausted. And if my kids couldn't have peace in that car, like they are off the charts that night. Off the coloring chart, you understand? Off the color wheel. But we ended up turning around and going home because more importantly was to restore that peacefulness that needed to be in our family and to talk with them, calm them down, and get them in bed. Sometimes you have to stop something you're en route to do because the hearts of your children are at stake and you just don't want them fighting like that. Now, does that mean every single time they bickered, we turned around? No, we never go anywhere, right? But you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes you're like, what is going on? I'm so trying to get to this place and this is chaos. This is a disaster. Have y'all ever experienced that? Have you? Never? Well, I'm alone, apparently, in that. I just want to share my bad experiences for you all. But that's happened, and it didn't happen a lot, but it has happened occasionally. There was another time, like I tell you, one of the funniest things about one of my kids. Hello, Heather? She's watching from another room on Facebook Live. But she's heard me say this. We all laugh about it. So Heather was out of control this one night. She was a little bitty thing, like she's probably 5 and maybe 7. I can't remember. See, that's good, right? You just don't remember how old they were when these things happened. But our family was going to church on a Sunday night, and so she was beyond tired. And it showed in everything that was happening that afternoon. Like she needed a nap, but she never got a nap, and she was just mean and ugly. And so, this is so funny. The first part's not, but maybe you can relate to being so exhausted. So I said, Heather, you're not going to be able to go tonight. You're going to stay home with me. And everybody else went. She was so mad that she she goes, I love Jesus. I want to go to church. I love Jesus. And I was just in there like, I mean, this is just too good, but I'm so exhausted right now. But she went and got on her little bike, and she followed my family on her bike down our long driveway to the neighborhood, to the front of the neighborhood. They did not know she was following them because she loves Jesus. She even popped a blood vessel doing that. Like, really? Well, you should go to church then because of that. Anyway, so I literally was thinking, do I even want to go get her? Have y'all ever been like that? Okay. So I sat down for a spell, a 30-second spell, to come to my senses. I was like, okay, well, let's see. What's the worst thing that could happen? Okay, this is not good. I must go get her. So I got in my car, only to then at the front of the neighborhood have my family stopped and a police car coming in. Yes, as I'm loading the bicycle into the back of the car. And the police officer said, is everything okay, ma'am? And I said, well, not really. This one followed my family because she loves Jesus! And put her in the car. And I said, thank you, officer. But do y'all ever have crazy things like that happen? Okay. All right. Now, you know what? Today, she really does love Jesus. Okay. But that's how determined that child has been, like, her whole life. She wanted to go to church, but she was exhausted, so I had to stop. No, she couldn't go because it would have been of no value to her. She would have been asleep probably in a second, but she was so mean-spirited that we need to get her heart right. And I just sat on the couch with her with my arm around her, loving her. Like, this felt like love. This was thinking it through. You know. Now, boot camp. We call it Ellis Boot Camp. You put in your last name because you probably need boot camp in your family at some point. What I mean by this is, like I teach about peaceful home, and guess what? We mostly have it. But every once in a while, especially as they were growing up, every once in a while I go, what has happened? They used to obey right away, all the way with a cheerful heart. But this is not happening lately, and I feel, you know what I'm saying? You feel like, what is happening in my home? Well, 100% of the time, here's what's happening. We need to make an adjustment. We are not being consistent with some things we've found to be priorities in our home. Right? And so we must be aware of that and make those changes. But Ellis Boot Camp, remember to put your last name in there, is where we take very seriously, okay, we're going to pull things off the calendar for now. We are making it our aim to get this home back under control. Now, this is mostly when the kids were all younger, and we homeschooled. So this was easier, I realize, when you're home to be home. When you work, you're going to have to think about, you're gone during the day or your kids are at school. You need to take seriously, Lord, how can we make boot camp happen to address the heart and the things happening within our home? Yours will look differently than mine looked. I just cleared whatever was for the week or however long it took. It could be just one day does it. It could be just being consistent at night. But I would go over with your kids. Don't let them know you're calling it boot camp. Even though mine later, when they got older, they were like, Ellis Boot Camp is about to start. And they said it respectfully, But when they were little, I didn't say, it's Ellis Boot Camp time. But I did put on the calendar, Ellis Boot Camp. So they couldn't read them. But what we would do is we would role play. We would address the things that were going on, the fighting, the bickering, the different things we knew needed to adjust in our home. But it was just a time period of taking seriously, stopping our own agenda to address things that were breaking, that were altering a peaceful home. Within our homes, these are things that Ellis Boot Camp addressed, that we would want in our homes. It's regrouping, going back to the basics. It's first-time obedience, kindness in the family, honoring each other, a safe place, a place where hearts can open up with each other, where siblings aren't making fun of each other or laughing at them, but where there's kindness, good attitudes, all hearts united, gratefulness. Maybe you have bickering and kids not being grateful, they're whining. Enough, stop. Time to pull that, reel it in. Whatever issues that are making our home feel less than peaceful and calm. Or maybe apologizing is not taking place in the home, and it's time to start doing that. And then Bible studies and devotions can pertain to whatever those issues are. Again, you're not pointing fingers, but you are addressing things within the home to the whole group. Discipline is for restoration, changed heart, and when it's over, you are hoping that the goal is to bring that child from foolishness to wisdom. Proverbs 22:15, foolishness is bound up in the heart of the child, but a rod of correction drives it far from him. Proverbs 19:15, the rod and reproof give wisdom. Disciplining is not about showing your anger. And if you're angry, it is not the time for you to discipline. You get your child away from what the wrong is happening and have them sit and wait, and you get it together. You become calm. And one thing that helps is you realize you're shaping their heart. You're not trying to scar their hearts. You're shaping, you're coaching. And remember, it's an exhausting process. One, if you're dealing with little ones, one that could take place many times in one day over the same thing. But each time they're finished, like we talked about last week, their shoulders should be softened. Did we talk about that? I don't know if I actually made that point last week. Talked about a stiff neck, but you give one command, like, now go apologize to your sister. And if their shoulders are soft and they go and they obey the first time, success. If they go, ugh, then stop them right there. You come back and sit down. I'll come back in 5 minutes. Or you can call my name when you're ready to do this the right way. Okay, and we went over, I gave out sheets last week. I have some more if you weren't here to talk about the steps of this. But it's, what did you do? Was that right or wrong? What will you do next time? So that you're teaching them to own their part of the wrong, to apologize for it, and to be able to think through more than just that one situation. They can think through kindness applies to this and all situations. Okay? Now, apologizing, we talked about that. I know I was wrong. We talked about that last week. And then the last thing I want to talk about tonight is, I don't want to be in this mess. This is a phrase that I started when Heather was very little, out of necessity, because I saw Heather was like me in these particular areas. So 1 Peter 5:8, be self-controlled and alert. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may desire. Proverbs 25:28, like a city whose walls are broken down is a man who lacks self-control. Think about that. That's really good. A city whose walls are broken down allows what to come in? Harm, enemies. That is like a man who lacks self-control. It's a time bomb. It's a disaster waiting to happen, right? We let the enemy in when that happens. So we all get in situations we wish we could get out of, right? So this is a phrase I came up with, and I role-played with the kids, trained ahead and said, when you get in a situation, like they've lied. And then they lie again, and they lie again, and they lie again because they don't know how to get out of it. This is a phrase they can simply say. They can come up to you and say, Mom, I don't want to be in this mess. And that's a stopping point for it. It has been very helpful in our family. And then they can say, I lied. And I know I was wrong for lying. Will you forgive me? So I totally taught the kids that very phrase. And I'm going to tell you what happened in my life that I could identify with where that would have been very helpful for me. So I was in elementary school, and I was the kind that was funny, but I didn't ever want attention on me. Like I was behind the scenes making somebody crack up. Do you have people like that, right? And we had a substitute teacher, and I made the boy in front of me laugh, but the teacher said, what is your name? And I said, Rhonda. She put my name on the board. Embarrassment. And so I said, nothing like I really felt. I said, I don't care. And I was like, I do care. I want to say that. And she put a check mark, and I said, I don't care. I do care. She put another check mark, and I said, I don't care. I was in a mess. You been there? Does that sound like any of your kids? They get worse and worse and more into it. They don't know how to get out of it. All I needed to do was I wish I would have had the skills to, first of all, not to do that, but to say, I don't want to be in this mess. I do care. So that happened. And then when I was in college, fast forward, I still had a problem with self-control when my trigger happened, which was I was embarrassed. Know these triggers so your kids can learn them, and they are aware of them and can fight that, and they can overcome it. But I was taking a picture of my husband. He wasn't my husband then, but we were dating in college. He was on a flag football team for the Baptist Student Center, for crying out loud. And I was trying to figure out my camera, and then everybody's looking at me waiting, right? It's at the end of the game, they're ready to go. And now I'm getting embarrassed, right? And one of the guys goes, how much longer is this going to take you? I went over to him, and I went, boom, and knocked him. What was wrong with me? That's more embarrassing. I didn't have any sense about it. So I realized I got myself into messes when I was embarrassed. You have a trigger, maybe. Your kids probably have a trigger. Teach them this phrase. And it's helped so many times in our family for the kids at many ages to say, even when they're having a bad attitude and they're like, no, I didn't do that, and da, 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 da. And then you wait, and then they come back and they say, I don't want to be in this mess. Mom, I know I was rude for how I treated you. No, that was wrong. Will you forgive me? Yes. The phrase that I've taught the kids to do, first of all, I've talked about them noticing me when I am starting to get overwhelmed with things. I've told you before, my trigger is chaos. Clutter. Clutter in the home. I just feel like when there's stuff and there's piles everywhere, I can't think. And right? Hopefully I'm not that bad, but really it does start to bother me. And you have your own thing, right? So I have taught them to notice when I'm feeling that way. And I'm not the high stress person, so I'm not talking about they see you flipping out. That's something you need to adjust. You need to work on. I still need to work on that with myself too, but I'm not talking about them noticing you're flipping out. I'm talking about them seeing, in my case, seeing that there's a lot of things everywhere, and them saying this, learning to come up and say to me this phrase, Mom, what may I do to help? Mom, what can I do to help you right now? And saying it kindly. That is learning to see through other people's eyes, learning to lighten my load, learning to care about me and to study me like I've studied the other people in my family. If the dishes are piled up and they're all ready to go, and I'm thinking, look how overwhelming this kitchen is, I should be able to say, hey guys, I want y'all to help. I shouldn't have to do the passive aggressive thing, right? Not I shouldn't have to. I shouldn't do those kind of things, the silent treatment, the sarcasm, does anybody else ever see this mess? Am I the only one helping clean up in here? I need to learn to communicate properly with my family and express the needs, right? Hey, can y'all come in here and help, please? There's a big mess in here right now. Okay, say it sweet. And they should be obedient and come help. But they should also recognize if they're like running through the house to go upstairs to go to bed, they will do that at some point, right? And they see me in the kitchen going, where do I start? Mom, what can I do to help? All right? It's a sweet way to teach them to be about others. That takes you teaching them what to notice. And teaching them right now is a good time to say that to me, kids. Okay? Guiding everybody in the home how to work like a family in harmony. Everyone helping everybody and seeing life through other people's eyes, lightening the other's load and caring about each other. Well, that's what we have for tonight. I hope that was helpful. Don't miss next week, lesson 5, when we talk a lot more about respect. We're going to talk about respecting our spouse, respecting our respect from our kids to us, and between children, and a lot more. Don't miss next week. It'll be life-changing.